There is a wildlife biologist walking across the University of Washington campus. He has walked it hundreds of times. He is not doing anything unusual. But on this particular morning, 47 of the 53 crows he passes stop what they are doing and scold him. Not a few crows near his path. Not crows that had been startled by something nearby. 47 out of 53, across the whole route, responding specifically to one face in a crowd. Every crow that scolded him had either been trapped and handled by his research team 2 years earlier, or had learned what that face meant from another crow that had been. The 6 crows that passed without a second look had never encountered him before. New birds, no file on him, no response. This is from a study published in the journal Animal Behaviour in 2010, by wildlife biologist John Marzluff and his colleagues at the University of Washington. The title is Lasting Recognition of Threatening People by Wild American Crows. The crows had kept a specific face in memory for over 2 years, distributed that information through the flock, and were actively teaching younger birds what it signaled. That is the finding. What it opens up is a longer question: what face recognition actually is, what it was built to solve, and why the architecture doing it in a crow's brain is recognizable from the inside of yours. In 2006, Marzluff and his graduate students captured 7 crows at 4 sites on the Seattle campus. During the capture, handling, and banding, every researcher wore the same rubber caveman mask. A second mask, a realistic rendering of then Vice President Dick Cheney, was worn during. One mask meant danger. One mask meant nothing. The capture itself lasted a few minutes. The crows were measured, fitted with colored leg bands, and released. Then the researchers went back to their normal routines, without the masks. Within days, crows in those areas were scolding anyone wearing the caveman mask. The Cheney mask produced no response. The pattern was clear before the team had finished processing the data. What happened next is what makes this study different from a simple demonstration of bird memory. The scolding call of an American crow carries. Other crows hear it and come to look. They see the mask. They update. Over weeks and months, crows that had never been trapped, never witnessed the original event, began participating in the response. The information had moved through the flock without anyone teaching it directly. The face became a shared social fact. 2.5 years after the original capture, the proportion of crows scolding the caveman mask was still rising. The study ended, but Marzluff kept walking the campus. 5 years in, roughly 60% of the crows on campus were scolding the mask on site. Crows that hatched long after the original event were carrying the knowledge forward. 17 years after the experiment began, the scolding had finally stopped. Crows are not alone in this. What Marzluff's team found in corvids, other researchers have found across very different branches of the animal tree. In 2001, neuroscientist Keith Kendrick and his team titled "Sheep Don't Forget a Face." They trained sheep to recognize 25 pairs of other sheep faces, pairing one face from each pair with a food reward, and tested their recognition repeatedly over time. Individual sheep held 50 distinct face identities in memory for more than 800 days. They also recognized human faces, and they showed similar patterns of neural activation in the right temporal lobe during these tasks. That is the same hemisphere, roughly the same cortical region, processing the same kind of social information in a species that diverged from the crow's lineage several 100 million years ago. Face recognition as a dedicated cognitive system appears to be what biologists call convergent evolution, different lineages arriving at the same solution because the problem is the same. The problem is not vision. The problem is social life. A face carries more concentrated social information than almost any other signal one animal can receive from another. It carries identity, which tells you who you are dealing with and what history you share. It carries emotional state, which tells you what they are likely to do next. It carries group membership, which tells you whether this individual is inside your alliance or outside it. And in species that live in complex social groups, all of this information matters constantly, because the consequences of misreading it are real. The crow that scolded a face it had seen 2 years ago was not performing an impressive trick. It was running a necessary piece of social software in an environment where the cost of getting that wrong, of treating a known threat as neutral, is something you do not recover from easily. The system that does this is not simple. It does not store faces the way a camera stores an image. It stores faces as identity nodes linked to behavioral outcomes, with emotional weight attached, embedded in social context, and shareable with the group. That is a sophisticated structure. And the reason it appears in birds, sheep, primates, and most social mammals is that the social environment kept selecting for it. Here is where this crosses over. Your brain has a region called the fusiform face area, located in the underside of the temporal lobe. Any other visual category. Not complex objects. Not other animals. Faces specifically. This area processes them differently from everything else, treating a face as a single unit rather than a collection of features, because that holistic read is faster and more accurate for extracting identity. Your amygdala, a structure deeper in the temporal lobe, codes the emotional significance of what you perceive. When you see a face associated with a bad experience, the amygdala fires. The response is already beginning. Your hippocampus connects that face to episodic memory, the specific context, what happened, what the stakes were. This is not a human invention. It is a parallel solution to the same problem, built in a different brain architecture, shaped by similar pressures over a much longer stretch of time. When that system is damaged or absent, the consequences are striking. People with prosopagnosia, sometimes called face blindness, lose the ability to recognize faces despite. They cannot recognize family members from appearance alone. They cannot pick their own reflection out of a crowd of photographs without additional cues. The face, as a unit of social information, has gone silent for them, and the social cost is immediate and significant. What that loss reveals is how load-bearing the system is in ordinary life. Most of the time you do not notice how much of your social navigation runs on face recognition because it runs without effort. It only becomes visible when it fails. Like the crows, you do not just remember faces. You circulate what you know about them. Human social behavior includes a sophisticated version of what the crow flock did with the scolding call. You warn your friends about someone who behaved badly. You describe what happened and what to look for. Reputations form, which are distributed records of how a person has acted, pass through a network of relationships, updated over time. In its evolutionary function, this is not gossip in the dismissive sense. It is threat information. Already paid the cost of learning it, so others do not have to. The young crows that scolded a face they had never seen were the beneficiaries of exactly that transfer. They did not need to be trapped themselves to know that face was dangerous. The older birds had already run that experiment and encoded the result. And like the crows, you hold specific faces in memory with the emotional charge attached. You can encounter someone who wronged you years ago and feel the physical response before any deliberate thought has occurred. That is not you choosing to remember. That is the amygdala pulling a file that has been sitting there the whole time, tagged with exactly what happened and what it meant. The crow held that face for more than 2 years. Some of the birds doing the scolding at the end of the study had never been trapped, never seen the original event. They scolded anyway, because the older birds had taught them that this face was dangerous, and the information was good enough to act on. You have been in both positions. You have learned from someone else's experience of a person. And you have held a face in memory. The capacity for face recognition is not what makes any of this interesting. What makes it interesting is what the crow study reveals about how ancient the capacity is, and what it was built to do. It was built to solve a problem that every social animal faces, which is tracking the most important variable in a social environment. Not territory in the abstract. Not resources in the abstract. Which individual did what, and what is the probability they would do it again? That question does not require language. It does not require a theory of mind in the philosophical sense. It requires a memory system that stores individual faces with behavioral outcomes attached, and a mechanism for distributing that information to others who did not witness the original event. Crows have this. Sheep have this. You have this. The systems differ in architecture and scope, but the structure they solve is the same. The next time you find yourself holding a face in your head long after you thought you should have let it go, or warning someone about a person you have not seen that you cannot quite name but act on anyway, You are running very old software. It is still current.